April 20th, 1999 began as a normal school day in the town of Littleton, Colorado. Columbine High School sat at the edge of a quiet suburban area, surrounded by parking lots, athletic fields, and residential streets. Nearly 2,000 students were enrolled at the school. That morning, classes followed their usual schedule. Teachers prepared lessons. Students moved between hallways, lockers, and classrooms. Nothing in the early hours suggested that the day would become one of the most documented and analyzed acts of violence in modern American history. The school itself was a large, open campus built to accommodate a growing population. It included multiple academic wings, a cafeteria, a library, administrative offices, and common areas designed for student movement and interaction. Columbine had hosted dances, sporting events, and community activities for years. It was a familiar place for families in Jefferson County. On the surface, the environment appeared stable and routine. Shortly before midday, the atmosphere began to shift in ways that were not immediately visible to those inside the building. Outside the school, events were unfolding that would soon disrupt the normal rhythm of the day. Within minutes, routine would be replaced by confusion, fear, and a rapidly escalating emergency that would draw national attention. The early moments of the attack were chaotic and difficult to interpret in real time. Students and staff initially struggled to understand what was happening. Sounds that did not belong in a school environment echoed through hallways and common areas. Some individuals believed they were hearing construction noise or a prank. Others realized immediately that something was wrong. As the situation unfolded, it became clear that the school was under attack. Emergency calls began reaching local authorities. Dispatchers received fragmented reports describing loud noises, injuries, and people fleeing the building. The information was incomplete and often contradictory. Law enforcement agencies in the area mobilized quickly, but the scale and nature of the situation were still unclear. Officers arriving at the scene encountered students running from the school, some injured, many in shock. Inside the building, students and staff reacted in different ways. Some sought shelter in classrooms, offices, and storage areas. Others attempted to escape through exits and windows. The library, located near the center of the school, became one of the most critical locations during the attack. Events there would later be reconstructed through witness accounts, physical evidence, and timelines established during the investigation. As the attack continued, confusion dominated the scene. Communication between responding officers, school administrators, and emergency medical services was limited by the rapidly changing circumstances. Law enforcement established a perimeter around the school. Ambulances staged nearby, waiting for clearance to enter. Parents began arriving at the scene after hearing reports through phone calls, radio, and television. News helicopters appeared overhead. Local media outlets interrupted programming to report an active situation at a high school in Littleton. Early reports were inaccurate in many details, but they conveyed the seriousness of the event. The story spread quickly beyond Colorado. National networks began live coverage, often relying on limited information and eyewitness accounts from students who had escaped by early afternoon. The immediate threat inside the school had ended. Law enforcement teams conducted systematic searches of the building to ensure there were no additional dangers. Injured students and staff were transported to hospitals across the region. Families waited for information at designated reunification centers. The process of accounting for everyone inside the school took hours. As the situation stabilized, authorities began the process of understanding what had happened. The initial focus was on securing the scene and providing medical care. Only later would investigators begin the extensive task of reconstructing the timeline, identifying those responsible, and examining how the attack unfolded. The aftermath of the day was marked by grief and disbelief. 13 people had been killed, and more than 20 others were injured. The community of Littleton was thrust into the national spotlight. Vigils were held. Schools across the country held moments of silence. Questions emerged almost immediately, though answers would take much longer. In the days that followed, investigators from multiple agencies worked together to document every aspect of the attack. The school remained closed as evidence was collected. Classrooms, hallways, and common areas were examined in detail. Physical evidence was cataloged. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly to clarify timelines and movements. Authorities released information gradually, correcting earlier inaccuracies. It became clear that the attack had been planned in advance. Investigators reviewed materials left behind, including writings and recordings, to establish intent and preparation. These materials were treated as evidence and analyzed within the context of the investigation, rather than as explanations. Media coverage intensified as new details emerged. The attack was described as unprecedented in scale for a school setting in the United States. Discussions about school safety, youth violence, and emergency response filled news programs and public forums. Columbine became a reference point in debates that extended far beyond Jefferson County. As investigators worked, families of the victims began the long process of mourning. Funerals were held under heavy media presence. Community members struggled to reconcile the familiarity of the school with the violence that had occurred there. Counseling services were provided for students, staff, and families. The investigation continued for months. Official reports were compiled to document the sequence of events. These reports aimed to provide an accurate record rather than an interpretation. They detailed times, locations, and actions based on available evidence. The complexity of the case required careful review to avoid speculation. Over time, Columbine's impact extended into policy discussions. Law enforcement agencies examined their response protocols. Schools reviewed emergency preparedness plans. Training methods were reassessed based on lessons drawn from the event. Changes in response strategies would later influence how authorities handled similar incidents. Years passed, but Columbine remained a point of reference. Academic studies, government reports, and media retrospectives revisited the case repeatedly. Each examination sought to understand what could be learned, often focusing on systems and for responses rather than individuals. At this point, it is important to step briefly outside the narrative of events to consider the broader context. The Columbine tragedy did not occur in isolation from social, institutional, and cultural frameworks. Its significance lies not only in what happened on one day, but in how it reshaped conversations about safety, responsibility, and preparedness in public spaces. This moment is intended for reflection rather than conclusion, and viewers are encouraged to consider the documented sequence of events and their wider implications before returning to the narrative. As time moved forward, the physical site of the school underwent changes. Columbine High School reopened with modifications intended to address security and memorialize those who were lost. The community faced the challenge of moving forward while carrying the weight of what had occurred. Legal proceedings related to the event unfolded over several years. Civil lawsuits were filed and resolved. Official findings were published. These processes aimed to address accountability within existing legal frameworks, though they could not undo the harm that had been done. The historical consequences of Columbine were far-reaching. Emergency response models shifted toward faster intervention. The concept of immediate action by first responders gained prominence. School design, security measures, and crisis communication strategies were influenced by the lessons drawn from April 20th, 1999. Columbine also marked a turning point in media coverage of mass violence. News organizations reconsidered how such events were reported. Ethical questions about exposure, repetition, and impact became part of professional discussions within journalism. In the decades since, Columbine has remained part of the public record as a case study in tragedy, response, and change. Its name became synonymous with a moment that altered how schools, communities, and authorities approached safety. The event is remembered not for spectacle, but for the lasting effects it had on policy, practice, and public awareness. Thank you for watching this documentary. If you found it informative, please like the video and subscribe to Voices of Crime for more factual, chronological, true crime stories. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and consider watching another video from Voices of Crime to continue exploring documented cases that have shaped modern history.